we take that. So, Luna, I'm going to pull you in. I know that you have worked for many years and a lot of times with what we refer to as survivors of gender-based violence. Luna, a lot has been said, and I want to direct one question as I welcome you in. Dr. Bukusi spoke specifically about early childhood experiences. I think it's something that more and more we talk about in psychology circles and in child upbringing. So as I pull you in, I really need you to speak about this, that sometimes parents are not aware how adversely domestic violence affects that child's mind, child's development, and all the later years of that child's life. So as I pull you in, Luna, I would really be interested in you addressing the impact of domestic violence in children. So Luna, welcome.
Okay.
Let's take the floor.
Thank you. Thank you very much. That's a very pertinent question. When you talk about how domestic violence affects children, I cannot even express it. I can't even overemphasize. Because sometimes we think, even as we perpetrate or even get involved in the domestic violence, that the children don't know. Sometimes we even say they are too small to understand. We cannot even explain to them, but they are really affected. Remember, the early years of a child are the formative years. So what are you forming? You are forming their worldviews. You're forming their beliefs. You're forming their values, okay? You are basically telling them, this is how you behave in the world. And so what are you demonstrating to them? What are you showing them? What are you teaching them? They are learning so much at that point. Home is the primary context that a child is in. So whatever they learn at home, that is how they view the world. That is how they will express themselves in the world. So they are growing into this. As they get into adolescence, they are forming their personality. So you're contributing so much to who they are and who they become. And so the formative years of a child are very important. They're very critical in what you'd want them to become. And so what we are dealing with now are issues that were done or they were formed many years ago. Okay? And so they are now just displaying themselves in this season, or in this, not really this season of COVID, but in this time of life. Maybe more in the COVID season, but since domestic violence has always been there, it's now displaying what was formed earlier is what is displaying right now. And so we have to go back to those formative years. Maybe you may ask yourself, so now that I'm an older person, what do I do? I had no control over my childhood. Very true, you had no control. There is nothing you could do about it. You grew up in it, but there's something you can do about it now. There's something in psychology you say, when you get insight, when you get awareness of where you are, then you're better, you can form your decisions. You can make better decisions even today. So it's not late. When we talk about psychological interventions, it's not late even for an older person who grew up in a very abusive background and took up those traits and now is displaying them now to change. It is very possible. We are not going to go back and just keep saying, oh, you know, that's how I grew up, so there's nothing I can do about it. I just grew up in a very violent home. No, that is not true. Remember, children learn in very different ways. It's when they see you do something, especially when they're younger, they grow up modeling your behavior. So when they see that you sort out your issues, let's say fighting, what do they learn? That is how people sort out. That's how adults sort out issues. They shout, they call each other names, they fight. That is how they do it. And so they pick up all these things from you. Look at how a child speaks sometimes. And I know in many homes, it's attributed to the mother because she's the primary caregiver. They say, oh, you have learned how to speak like your mother. That's a very common statement. Why? Because we know the role of modeling. We know the role of observational learning. So the formative years are very critical in forming who, or in helping shape a person. There are many other issues that will come into play. But that one is a critical one, and I'm glad that Dr. Bukusi mentioned that. It's very, very critical in the growing up of a child. So even as we talk about psychological help and interventions, and especially during domestic violence, I work with survivors of domestic violence. And I know there are many people, there have been rounds that have said, oh, those are the hardest people to work with. They always go back, they come out and they go out. But the truth is, some of them don't even know that they're being abused, because violence has only been attributed to physical. So as long as I've not been beaten, then there's no violence happening, but that's not true. And so when we are working with them, most of the time we will work with people who have come out. And that's why seeking for help or reporting what is happening is very important. Sometimes the survivors may not report themselves, but you who can see, you who can witness, please report for them so they can find help. Some of them are seeking for help, but they don't know where. They would want to be helped, but they don't know where they can find this help and how they can find this help. So I'm very glad when I see numbers coming up, toll-free numbers, where people can report anonymously. You know, you can call and find legal help, psychological help. It's very important. But these numbers need to be even more visible. Let me say that. With the few organizations that I work with, who work with people who have survivors of domestic violence, even the what we'll call the few who are reporting, it can be overwhelming, because those numbers are quite high. I always say one is too many. So if you can just report, that means that's a first step into getting out of domestic violence. Report means you're shouting, help, just help. Whichever way it will come, just help. So if you can report, I know for men, Mr. Otina said it might be a little harder, yeah, because when they go to report, even at the police station, they are told, please look for bigger problems to report. This one is too small. This one is for women. Women are the ones who are beaten. So Mr. Otina, if you can direct men where they can report, you know, because all forms of domestic violence have a psychological impact. All of them, whether it's physical, whether it's emotional, whether it's sexual, they have a psychological impact. And so shout for help. Help someone. I always say help a brother, help a sister by reporting for them. You can even just call and say, I have seen, you know, I'm hearing Lillian screaming from her house. Yes. Maybe there's something happening. So please just report. Help someone.
Yeah, yes. I think you said something really interesting, because what happens in modern life is people start minding their own business. So you hear your neighbor is screaming, you're like, I don't want to. So I think it's a really important point that we need to really look out for each other. I see someone has raised up their hand. Luna, maybe that question is for you. So I'm going to ask him to speak. I see the name looks like Huawei. You have a question? If you raise your hand, could you please ask your question? Yes.
Hello. Yes.
Yes.
When it comes to the question, we realize that it has been a big challenge. So many cases go unreported. What are we doing about it to ensure that every single person?
Well, I think we've got the gist of the question. She's basically asking about cases that go unreported. So what are we going to do about that? That's I think we can have that question in mind, Luna. Okay. I saw someone called Ambrose. Ambrose had their hands up. Ambrose, are you still there? Okay. So I think, Luna, maybe you can address that question in terms of many cases going unreported. And maybe that is linked with what Sophie had mentioned earlier, where maybe society finds some type of violence acceptable. And so then people find it all the time, oh, that is acceptable. So how do we address that? And as you answer that question, Luna, please give us some key things that people can do, both men and women who are experiencing violence, whether it's physical violence or emotional violence at home. So Luna, please take that up.
Okay, thank you. I'm not sure I got your first question, but let me just jump into the second. What can they do? What was your first, Lillian? I didn't hear that very well.
I think the first question is what I will ask, because Huawei, I see her back on screen. I think she was asking, what can we do about a lot of cases that go unreported?
Okay.
Yeah, I think I got that. Yeah, so she knows her head. I think that's correct.
Okay, thank you. And I believe everyone here has a part to play when it comes to reporting, because most of the time, when you are, for example, having a headache or you have a toothache, what do you usually do? You look for a dentist, isn't it? In fact, sometimes you get to the dentist place before they even open because the toothache is too painful. And that's what you should get to, that place. I can see Mr. Otina laughing. That is the truth. Sometimes it has to get to that place where you say, I can't take this anymore. I tell the survivors most of the time, violence, domestic violence stops with you. So you have to understand how it's affecting you as an individual and come out. Sometimes it's hard because of our culture. So what do? Those of us who are more informed about domestic violence can help. And that's why your neighbor, your sister, your relative can be someone you can tell so that you come out through them. And there are places that you can, I know they have not been so available. Like I know numbers used to be there that you call, it used to be 999. It was a police hotline or something. I don't know if it's been changed to something. But I know that right now we have hotlines that are working. I can for sure tell you, I work with an organization, and maybe I can name it, Cover. Their hotline is working. And they are always receiving those cases. And I have seen, I think Kenya Law Society also has, I have seen people, 1195, they are working. There are many other hotlines, even government hotlines, that are honestly working. And we need to broadcast them more, because people are afraid to go to the police station. Some police stations have very good gender desks, but some of them also have the ones that will ridicule you. So let's talk about this more. Most of us who are out there, the Ministry of Health, the Ministry of Education, everybody should talk about this so that we find places where we can report safely. So reporting is one of the things you can do if you are experiencing domestic violence, or you know someone who is experiencing domestic violence. The other thing we talk about is if you're in an environment where you are experiencing it, sometimes it's not the best place to handle this domestic violence from. You need to seek a safe space. Dr. Bukusi talked about communities that are no longer what they used to be. We are no longer having an uncle who can be a place, a person who will appeal for you, you know, and say, no, my nephew cannot be abused. We no longer have some of those spaces. But when you do, please seek a family member, a friend, a neighbor who can be a safe space. If not, what most speakers have advocated for, safe spaces are needed. I know NGOs are trying to come up with some of this, but when funding is over, it's gone. Because a safe space is a place where you go and not only find physical safety, but emotional and psychological safety. So there should be places where you go and meet a counselor, where you can have access to a psychiatrist if possible, medical help, you know, a pastor, all those, an imam. They should be in that space, or you should be able to access all those services in that space. But sometimes it's not possible when we have left this thing for NGOs to run. So the government should be involved in this. So safe spaces for me is something I would advocate for very, very highly. Please look for a place away from where you're being abused, so that you can have your mind rested enough to think through if this is the kind of life you want to live, okay? Apart from that, seek therapy. You realize we've said childhood issues are affecting us. So what do? Do we live with them? There's a way we can process them. There's a way you can live a freer, healthier life. So look for therapy, look for counseling, And we have churches that are providing this. We have hospitals that are providing this. We have private practices that are providing this. Seek for help, okay? Seek for help. I cannot leave this without mentioning people living with disabilities, because sometimes they are forgotten during domestic violence. They are just nobody, not really nobody, but very few people who talk about them, but they are really suffering. And so what do you do with them? These are people who cannot report for themselves most of the time. And so they'll need someone to report for them. Sometimes they report months later, years later. Some of them, they can't even express what happened to them until you see maybe one is expectant or is testing positive for a sexually transmitted disease, and you're wondering what happened. So those are people we should have mechanisms in place, policies in place to protect them, especially when it comes to gender-based violence. Okay?
Yeah.
So yes, I know my time is done, but please, Lillian, do not forget even the people who do this. If you're working on a hotline somewhere, you also need therapy. Mental wellness. I am an advocate of mental wellness. So the frontline workers, just the same way they did yesterday in Kenyatta, setting up a center for the nurses, frontline workers in dealing with gender-based violence also need psychological support. Thank you.